Funding for Curate, the Arizona Arts and Culture Fund, is made possible by Signal Society member Eleanor Light, and by you can become a curator of the arts on 8. For more information, call 602-496-8888.
And now, an 8 special presentation.
This time on Art Beat Nation. The color field paintings of Rothko rediscovered.
The forms in my paintings are meant to be like the actors in a drama.
Delve deep into the untold story of the Miami Sound.
Instead of playing golf or pool, I love to make records. That was my passion.
Sit down with a Hollywood screenwriter.
Why do you write?
I write because it is every art form that I adore. I write screenplays, I write films because it's every art form. It is poetry.
And immerse yourself into the old American West.
The museum is committed to both the historic interpretation of the West, but also a modern pop sensibility.
It's all ahead on this edition of Art Beat Nation. Funding for Art Beat Nation is made possible by donations to Curate, the Arizona PBS Arts and Culture Fund, and by contributions to 8 from viewers like you. Thank you. It is not uncommon for artists to become inspired to change directions in their craft. In the early 1940s, renowned artist Mark Rothko rejected realism and began a series of abstract works meant to evoke classical myth. In the late 40s, he created his first color field paintings, the works on which his stature as one of the most famous American painters of the post-war period rests. We head to the Denver Art Museum to explore an exhibition celebrating these works and other abstract expressionists called Figure to Field, Mark Rothko in the 1940s.
We are very fortunate here at the Denver Art Museum not only to have this extraordinary group of Rothko paintings and drawings, but also to have so many of the early works. And these early works are rarely seen.
Russian-born Mark Rothko was largely self-taught. He gained fame in the art world for his so-called color field paintings. Dam's exhibit includes some of those works, but it also shows another side of the painter that most are probably unaware of.
It's really great to see where he came from. And of course, like other artists of his generation, he started with the figure. And he was much influenced by Milton Avery, by Max Weber, and as other artists of his generation, he moved through various periods. He went through a period that he was much influenced by myth, and of course by the Surrealists, and by Jung, and by Nietzsche and Freud. And then he becomes very interested in the freedom of Surrealist automatism. Automatism is much like those of us who doodle. In other words, we're not thinking about what we're putting on the surface, but we're just freely drawing or painting. These works are not about any subject. These are what we would call non-objective. In other words, they are just about themselves, and so they don't refer to anything else. It's part of his development, of his evolution, towards greater and greater purity in his work.
But achieving the purity found in those color field paintings was an evolutionary process.
What's so interesting about the 1940s and about these artists that we now know for their own signature work, whether it's Pollock and his drips or whether it's Still with his wonderful jagged work, all of these artists were grappling with the same thing in the 1940s. The war was on. They are just coming into their own. They're definitely talking to each other. They're thinking about things together. They're all going through this issue of how to deal with the world as it is at that point. And so what did people do to get through all of this? And Rothko and his contemporaries were so interested in myth and in the unconscious, and this was a way to kind of grapple with your everyday life. But at this point, right then in the 1940s, there's such a correlation between what they were doing. Then, just about 1950, each of these artists was moving into a new direction that would characterize the work of that artist. Then he moves from those surrealist automatist works when he begins to bring together some of his forms. We've got a great quote on the wall which says, "The forms in my paintings are meant to be like the actors in a drama." But in other words, he's starting to coalesce some of those forms. And that's the prelude to what we finally get in the color field works. And of course, Rothko is known as one of the most important artists of the so-called New York School. And the color field branch of that is the branch in which he is really the star. And I think that when you get to the color field works, you're really seeing the celebration of that ability to thin the paint, to paint over and under and have these effects. And that, I think, is what can provide this meditative experience, is that it's not just one color there. These works are meant to be meditative. We put several examples in the gallery with seating in the middle in a way that people can spend a little time contemplating a single work. And we have that because we hope that people will lose themselves within a painting. And I think when we ask the question of what should art do for a person, every person is different. And I think that's what can be celebrated.
A legend in the music business, Henry Stone co-founded indie giant TK Records in South Florida in 1973, introducing the world to disco and changing the music industry forever. Stone's open-door policy for musicians of diverse musical backgrounds laid the groundwork for an iconic Miami sound. Learn more about Stone's life and work with documentary filmmakers Mitchell Egbert and Mark Moorman.
The documentary is about a man named Henry Stone, who is now 91, who created the framework of really all the music that came in Miami for the last probably 60-some years, from R&B to becoming the king of disco, establishing the biggest independent record label in the world, TK Records. Then actually going on after the end of disco, or when they said disco died, to getting into freestyle music, and even had significant contributions, I think, to Miami bass. Even though it's about the music, it isn't all about the music. It's about a man and all the artists that he discovered and nurtured, who, many of them overcoming obstacles, particularly Henry himself, in order to grow, both as artists, musicians, and most importantly as people. And I think that's really the universal message of the film. Of course, it's also about Miami, and a story that's really never been told in terms of the history of Miami music. Like I said, a lot of people don't even know it came from Miami, and we want that story out there.
Scene 306, take one. We're here today shooting a recording session, and Henry Stone is recording the song St. Pete Blues, which he originally recorded with Ray Charles 60 years ago. And today he's doing it with Benny Lattimore. And Steve Alemo is manning the board. And there's also, it's going to be a TK reunion as well. Somebody who really deserves to have his story told. And he helped out a lot of people and really, you know, is the godfather of the Miami sound. And really felt like we wanted to make this film. And so we shot George McRae this week, who made the famous Rock Your Baby, the first disco song ever. Timmy Thomas and Clarence Reed is in the house today. So we're making this film, and these people came out to show their support for Henry. And we've got a crew of my guys here today. We've got 3 cameras, got a couple Reds and a couple 5Ds, and I was trying to make this thing great, because that's always my philosophy when making a film. You make something great, and everything will take care of itself. So that's what we're trying to do.
They know me by TK Productions, or TK Records. In the 70s, we ended up being the largest disco company in the world, with KC having consecutive #1 hit records. They didn't hit #1 on the Billboard charts. because we had a combination of musicians that put their sounds together along with a good bass sound and put that all together, and that became the Miami Sound. At this point in my life, I think this has to be made. The story has to be told about the Miami Sound, how it was created, and how it influenced the world of music around the world. Instead of playing golf or pool, I love to make records. That was my passion. And my passion ended up being TK Records in the 70s, where we became the #1 disco company around the world.
For more on the film, check out rockyourbabymovie.com. In this next segment, Hakeem Bellamy sits down with Matthew McDuffie, screenwriter of the film The Face of Love, starring Annette Bening. McDuffie shares the importance of stories and what it's like to be a full-time storyteller, providing some tips along the way.
Why is story important?
Because it's everything, because everyone has one. As my son says, stories, they're everywhere. And it's interesting because my mother had this gift where she could see like a couple on the street, and she would make up a story about them. She would go something like, "Oh, it's so tragic." Mm-hmm. You go like, "Well, what's that, Mom?" "Well, she's in love with him," and she would go on, and it sort of made me realize that everybody, everywhere, has an infinite story to tell. It's what makes us human, and it's what makes us love each other. So that's why it's so important.
When you are creating characters, is that part of the process?
I just steal.
You just steal.
It actually, everything that I write sort of starts with some sort of autobiographical kernel. Story is really kind of like emotional mathematics, in that you're creating an algorithm that creates the response that you're looking for. I know that sounds cold-hearted, but it really is puzzle making. Well, particularly film writing.
Sure.
I mean, novel writing, it can be about observation, and certainly film is, but you want to have an emotional response from the audience, and that means setting things up in a particular way, so when a reveal is placed in front of the audience or in front of the characters, they can't help but react in the way that you hope.
When you're putting together a screenplay, what is the dramatic structure that you're looking for, and how do you create it, and why is it important?
It's important because that's how you get the reaction that you're looking for. The first thing to establish is a problem for the character, a reason for the story to exist, something that means a lot to that character. And then you sort of establish, what are they going to do about it? Because that's really where conflict and story comes from, is somebody wanting something and not being able to get it. So that sort of drives the story. That's what creates the scenes for you, is this need and obstacle that prevents the need. And then being a good dramatist is sort of like being a bit of a sadist, in that you want to take them as far from whatever they want as possible. You want to, yes, exactly. You want to torture them. And it doesn't matter if it's a comedy or a tragedy. You try to take them as far away from what they want as possible, to create that emotional thing. And that's sort of like, that's the crisis of the whole piece. And then it's like, okay, that acts as like a mousetrap in terms of the final confrontation of whatever the forces that you've developed in the beginning of the story that they're going to have to face at the end. And there's this purgation, I guess.
And that's our connection to it as an audience or as viewers, because it's such a natural part of the human condition.
I think everything has that structure, if you really think about that. It's the structure, and you know, poetry probably has it as well, in that it's like the structure of a wave on a beach. And there are lots of different types of waves, right? Big crashing waves or gentle waves that sort of lap upon the shore, but they all sort of rise to a place of absolute tension before they come tumbling down onto the sand or the rocks or whatever it is. And
so can you give us an example from your latest work of this moment we just discussed?
In The Face of Love, the film that came out with Annette Bening and Ed Harris, there is a moment where Annette Bening's character is holding a secret, and she's holding it from her daughter. So and I'm not ruining anything if I tell you this. Okay. Her husband has died 5 years ago, and she finds a man who looks just like him. So it's like a Hitchcock kind of romance. So she falls in love with his double and pursues him rather recklessly and is keeping it a secret from her friends or neighbors or her daughter. Wow. And so there must, and I knew as soon as this sort of story, came from, it actually came from the director of something his mother had experienced, I knew that daughter had to come into the story, that would be the crisis of this entire piece, that would be, the moment where there was the most tension in it, and that the mother would have to choose the lover over the daughter. And it was the emotional high point of the entire piece.
Why do you write?
I write because it is every art form that I adore. I write screenplays, I write films because it's every art form. It is poetry. When you're composing, it's poetry.
So tell us about the life of a screenwriter.
I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but it is a solitary existence. It's something that you have to live in your head, and you have worlds in your head that you're devising, that you sort of have to, universes that are constantly sort of spinning, and you're sort of pulling them down out of the firmament onto an electronic page. So there is that you sort of feel, I want to say, separate from the rest of the world, because you sort of feel like you're an observer, and because you're constantly shopping for little bits of humanity to put in your cart every moment of the day. So your existence, your very existence, is your material. And if you think about that, there's never going, or should never be, a moment when you don't have something to write about. It's what you're choosing to write about. That's the difficult part.
Is that the burden of the writer, to make those decisions and then always have a decision after the decision you just made?
Burden / luxury.
Right.
Because there are such heavier burdens in the world than trying to decide what to compose. But the agony is quite real, because, and I think it's in relation to the desire that one has to put it out there. That compulsion to create, I think, is so profound that when you are not in that process, that it is torturous, because you feel like you are letting not just yourself down, but you're letting your potential down. You're letting the species down. You're letting the universe down. I guess that's the burden, because you feel like, I have something to say and I'm not getting it out there. I'm not letting people know what it's like. And I think that's really, because it's a responsibility to be a storyteller, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of like, are you alone? Are we alone? Are we, what's our connective tissue here? And so I think that's really where the masochistic aspect of it is. You just don't feel like you're living up to your potential.
The Rockwell Museum, located in Corning, New York, holds one of the largest collections of Western American and Native American art in the eastern part of the United States. In our final segment, we take a look at the vast history and some of the significant galleries in the museum.
The Rockwell Museum is located in what we call Old City Hall. It opened in 1893 as the municipal offices for the city of Corning. It housed the police department, the fire department, the mayor's office, jail cells for both men and women, and served in that capacity until 1974, when it closed and the city moved to a new city location. The building was renovated in 1981 by Corning Glassworks at the time, and the museum moved here and opened in 1982. And we've been here ever since, and we house one of the largest collections of Western American and Native American art in the eastern part of the United States. Artemis is our buffalo that hangs on the facade of the museum building. He was made by local artist Tom Gardner. Tom received a grant from the New York State Council on the Arts in 1999, and Tom and the museum staff decided on the buffalo as the image that he would sculpt for the building. And after Artemis went up, the museum held a contest to name him, and the winning name was Artemis, which stands for Art is a Must.
The room that we're in right now is called the Remington and Russell Lodge, and it features a variety of works by Charlie Russell and Frederick Remington, the two titans of Western art from the late 19th and early 20th century. Throughout this gallery, you see many different depictions of cowboys and Indians and animals of the West, and it's a really nice way to immerse yourself into the West, and that's sort of the theme of this gallery, the West that was, the Old West. Right now we're looking at Mount Whitney, which is this massive painting behind me. It's painted by Albert Bierstadt in about 1880, and it's a real highlight of our collection for several reasons. First of all, you can see that it's rather large. It's 6 foot by 10 foot. This was one of his great paintings that he painted and toured around the country, and if you can believe it, people would actually pay a nickel to see some of these paintings, and it would be behind a curtain. That's how tremendous it was. It was time before TV and the internet, so something like this was quite striking. The museum is committed to both the historic interpretation of the West, but also a modern pop sensibility. The horse is a symbol of the American West. Deborah Butterfield makes all of her sculptures out of found objects, in this case driftwood. And so while this is a bronze sculpture, she made the original design entirely out of driftwood, and then the driftwood was, through a process, made into a bronze sculpture. One of the things that's very valued in traditional Western art is fidelity to nature. What we see here is a picture of Indians hunting buffalo. There is a beautiful romance to it, right? So you have the young Indian brave here about to shoot the arrow. While not terribly accurate as far as history or ethnography, Lee was greatly beloved as a painter because he got everything else right.
The uniqueness comes from the collection. So we have a historic collection of Western American art, Native American art in upstate New York. So most of our partner museums that also deal with this genre are located in the West. So our uniqueness is having the collection here in New York State.
To learn more, visit rockwellmuseum.org. For more arts and culture, visit azpbs.org/artbeat, where you'll find feature videos and information on the Arizona art scene. Funding for Art Beat Nation is made possible by donations to Curate, the Arizona PBS Arts and Culture Fund, and by contributions to 8 from viewers like you. Thank you.
Funding for Curate, the Arizona Arts and Culture Fund, is made possible by Signal Society member Eleanor Light, and by you can become a curator of the arts on 8. For more information, call 602-496-8888.